Okay, this is slide one of the Great Depression New Deal unit on Hoover's last days. We talked at the end of the last unit about President Hoover, the third of our Republican presidents in the 20s. Gets left sort of holding the bag, even though he's not fully responsible for the stock market crash and the resulting Great Depression. But he's there when it happens, so he will forever be associated with it and blamed for it. Now, there are really kind of five main causes to the Depression. We have talked about several of them already, but let's go ahead and number them in your notes. Number one, overproduction, both on the farm and in the factory. Overproduction. We were building too much stuff and growing too much food that prices dropped. Even when people sold something, they couldn't make much money on it because there was too much out there. So overproduction drove prices down. Number two, we've talked about this too, overexpansion of credit. People borrowed too much money. They bought too much stuff on credit. So they ended up with too many things that they couldn't afford. So too much debt, overexpansion of credit. That's number two. Number three, technological unemployment. Technological unemployment. Machines that were built put people out of work. Machines were doing jobs that people used to do. So machines did plenty of work. People didn't have enough work to do. Number four, excuse me, number four, there's a financial mess in Europe, mainly due to Hawley Smoot. We have talked about this at the end of our 20s unit. The Hawley Smoot tariff that jacked up taxes on all the imports. So then other countries just jacked up their taxes on our imports, and nobody traded with anybody else. So world trade shut down thanks to Hawley Smoot. Okay? And number five, finally, is the stock market crash. And we've talked about that. So we've talked about all five of those previously, but just to remind you, overproduction, number one. Number two, too much credit and debt. Three, technological unemployment. Four, Hawley Smoot. And five, the stock market crash. Now, when all that happens, unemployment soars. People can't pay their rent. They can't pay their mortgage. They lose their homes. And they are kicked out homeless. Now they got to go find somewhere to stay. That's when we get what are called Hoovervilles. These are little, as you can see on the slide picture there, these are camps or little towns, if you want to call them that, of shacks for the homeless. You would gather anything you could find, wood, tin, any kind of metal, to build a little shack for your family. And these popped up outside of every major city in the United States that the homeless would live. They're called Hoovervilles because the people blamed Hoover for this. So they named these little towns of homeless people Hoovervilles to kind of make fun of Hoover. But there you see on the picture, these towns would be burned by the authorities because they're hotbeds for disease and illnesses. So they would chase out the homeless, burn them down, and then no sooner did they get rid of everybody, they all showed back up and started rebuilding them again. Hoover's hope through all of this, his hope was that if he saved the biggest businesses, if he used government money to save the biggest businesses and keep them from going under, that he could stop this whole thing from getting any worse. To do that, to try to save the big businesses, he creates an organization called the RFC, Reconstruction Finance Corporation. Okay? You see in the picture there the name of it on the door, the window of the door of the office. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation was set up to bail out companies before they went bankrupt. Okay? And it actually did help. It saved a lot of companies from going bankrupt, which kept even more people from losing their jobs. But unfortunately for Hoover, it is a public relations nightmare because it looks to the poor and the homeless, like Hoover is willing to help the rich business owners, but he's not willing to do anything to help them. So while it does help things from getting even worse, it's a public relations nightmare for Hoover because it looks like he's helping the rich and ignoring the poor. Hoover's greatest fear throughout this whole thing was socialism. He was afraid of the government getting too involved in businesses, of the government taking over businesses. He was afraid of the workers taking over businesses. He wanted to protect capitalism because he honestly believed that capitalism could survive this. And it did, ultimately. But his greatest fear is socialism, that the government is going to have to step in, take over businesses, and run the owners out of business. Okay. And I said, while the RFC does help, by the time Hoover decides to step in and do anything, it's too little too late. The economy is a runaway train by that point. This depression is not going to be stopped anytime soon. So Hoover does help. He actually makes it, or he stops it from getting worse, as bad as it could have gotten. But really, by the time he decided to use his government power to do anything, it was too little, too late. Now, the last thing we need to talk about on this slide is a group of men known as the Bonus Army. Okay, the Bonus Army. This is a group of World War I veterans. Okay? Men who signed up, volunteered to fight in World War I, okay, were promised, if you sign up and help defend our country, we will pay you a bonus. We'll give you not only your salary, but we'll give you bonus money. So, men volunteered to fight. They fought. They lived through World War I. They come home. And the Depression hits, and they need help. So it's now the summer of 1932. 1932 was the worst year of the Depression. It's the summer of 32. And these veterans of World War I decide, we need our money. We need our bonus. There was a problem, though. The deal was, when they signed up to fight, that the government would pay them a bonus in 1945. Now, that's still 13 years away. But the problem is, they're afraid they're not going to make it to 1945. They don't need the money in 45. They need their money now. They have no job. They have no home. Their family is starving. Children need medicine, clothing. They need their money now. So about 20,000, yes, 20,000 veterans of World War I all went to Washington, D.C., demanding that their bonus be paid now. Hoover consults with Congress. Congress decides, no, we're not paying your money now. We'll pay you your money in 1945 when we said we would. All of you need to turn around and go home. Well, they don't. They refuse to leave. As you see in the picture there in front of the U.S. Capitol building, veterans here set up camp on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol and refuse to leave. Well, Hoover is left with no choice but to force them to leave. Hoover ordered the United States Army, led by future heroes of World War II, such as Douglas MacArthur, Dwight Eisenhower, George Patton. Future heroes of the United States Army led the United States Army against their veterans, their fellow soldiers. The United States Army was sent out to drive the Bonus Army home. They used, as you see in the picture, horseback mounted soldiers. They used tanks. They used tear gas, everything they could to drive these soldiers out and send them packing back home. Hoovervilles were burned to the ground. Tear gas was used. An 11-month-old baby died as a result from exposure to the tear gas. So we have the United States Army turned on veterans of the Army to drive them out. This is not one of our, most bright and shining moments. All right, that's it for our first slide. Moving on.